Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 127, The Schizoid Man.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm the brilliant, lovable, humble, and delightful John Champion.
Okay, anything else?
Oh, nothing. Nothing. Just that to know me is to love me, and to love me is to know me.
You done?
Not really. I figured this is my big chance. Get it all on tape.
Okay, you're done. Seriously, you're finished. I'm thinking, though, unless this is your Tasha Yar moment. I mean,
yeah, it could be.
This is what you're doing.
Right.
This is your farewell to the troops, as it were. Today's episode, The Schizoid Man. Oh, we are all excited, by which I mean me.
Yeah. I thought about that, Ken. I thought maybe that this was a show that I could just sit out.
This is a show. Well, no, I'm going to need you to hold me back a little bit later.
Oh, really? Okay.
There's a minute or two where I got a little, but we can talk about that a bit later. And if people want to talk to us about this later, or other stuff later, or some stuff earlier, if they know some neat temporal tricks, there are ways that they can get in touch with us. Would you like to tell people, John, or shall I?
Sure, I'll tell them. All you need to remember is really just one phrase, Mission Log Pod, because you can find us there at Facebook, Skype, and Twitter, Mission Log Pod. Or, barring that, you could call us, 323-522-5641. You could even put fingers to keyboard and email us at missionlog@roddenberry.com. And you can also visit us at our show website, including discovered documents and other great content, missionlogpodcast.com. And please remember, we may use your comments in an upcoming episode of Mission Log.
There's another thing that people can send us if they want to, and I know you kind of groove on this. Mm-hmm. Little bits of trivia.
Ooh, I love trivia.
I know you do. In fact, you may, I don't know for certain, but you may have prepared a little bit of trivia for today's show.
I got a little.
Okay.
Ken, do you know the show The Prisoner?
I am aware of the show The Prisoner.
Okay.
I don't know it.
The Prisoner is one of the coolest shows ever made.
Okay, that's what I hear.
Let me just get that out there to start with. The Prisoner is one of the coolest shows ever made. Ran one season. It was the brainchild of British actor Patrick McGoohan. He had done a show before called Secret Agent, and The Prisoner is kind of a weird take on what happens after you're a secret agent. Well, where do you go? How do they handle you when you know state secrets? Do they just, maybe send you off to some mysterious island where they mess with your identity and mess with your head? Well, that is exactly what they did in the show The Prisoner. And it's bizarre, it's mod, and the title of this particular episode of Star Trek, The Schizoid Man, is the title of episode 5 of The Prisoner. And it was specifically done that way because they had hoped to get Patrick McGoohan on to play the role of Dr. Graves. Apparently, they had gotten somewhat far along in the negotiation to get him, and whatever it was that happened at the last minute, they could not get him for this role. But that role was originally written for him. Now, in the episode of The Prisoner called The Schizoid Man, a little bit different. You have Patrick McGoohan as number 6, but you also have Patrick McGoohan playing a lookalike called number 12. So you'll have to check that out to see what happens in the original Schizoid Man. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is the Schizoid Man? What do we mean when we say the Schizoid Man? And actually, schizoid personality disorder is a thing, and that can be typified by certain symptoms described as long-standing detachment from social relationships, difficulty with emotions. People who have this are seen as loners, are seen as being solitary. They often show emotional coldness. It's estimated that between 3 and 5% of the world's population would have this disorder. Primarily shows up in men. But I wanted to get that out of the way because we may have some discussion about the guest lead role in this, Dr. Graves, and what would define him as being schizoid and what personality disorder he is suffering from. Now, the story was written by Richard Manning and Hans Baimler, but Tracy Torme actually wrote the teleplay. And it's interesting to point out the original idea was called Core Dump, and it had the crew of the Enterprise being very much aware of Dr. Graves' plan to move his consciousness into a computer. Now, Torme had a different story he had been working on in which Data would express personalities of two men that he knew on the planet where he was created. We had talked about that, the planet of colonists and the crystalline entity, which of course wiped them out. And he stores memories of those people. So he would have been expressing personalities of two of those people. And then those latent personalities surface when he is in the presence of a woman that they both loved. Now, when the story was purchased, Torme was assigned to write it, so he put in some of his ideas into the original story by Manning and Baimler.
You know, until you mentioned it, we totally forget that whole thing, don't we? I mean, the Data is actually made up of the personalities of the colonists.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, there you go. It's good.
Yeah, that's
good
my
call out.
That's my imitation of the writers on, I guess, after the first season, right? Hey, isn't Data made up of a bunch of personalities?
Nobody will remember.
Never mind.
Don't worry about it. Right.
Well, look at us. I totally forgot. I mean, you didn't.
Yeah.
But wow.
Now, some guest appearances we need to mention. Susie Plaxton as Dr. Salar. This is her only appearance in Star Trek as that particular character, but she most certainly comes back to Star Trek. We will see her again. And she appeared in several episodes of Mad About You. I know a show that you love, Ken.
Where she also played a doctor.
Yes, she did.
Yes, she was the OBGYN that they saw when they got pregnant in later seasons. Yeah, it is crazy how much of that show that I retain.
Well, again, our other podcast, after Moonlighting, after Man of Steel.
Yes, after Man of Steel. Yeah, I can't remember what else. There were a couple others that were supposed to do, aren't there?
Oh, Kolchak.
Well, Kolchak, yeah, certainly.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, we're going to need to actually move ourselves to robot bodies just to cover all the podcasts we're planning on doing,
We will. We will. All right. The character of Corrine was played by Barbara Allen Woods. She had a lot of TV under her belt, still working very frequently, and she was a regular on the TV version of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and also on the show One Tree Hill. So possibility that you've seen her on one or both of those. And finally, William Morgan Shepherd as Dr. Ira Graves. Now, his background was in theater, then on to TV and film. He appeared, of course, in Max Headroom, both the original and the full series as Blank Reg. You're a fan.
Oh, I love Blank Reg. Blank Reg is like, he is like, okay, so to the Max Headroom world, Blank Reg is to that what like podcasters are to Earth, I think. Because there's all the crappy corporate whatever, right? Media that's being shoved on people both in Max Headroom and here. Right. And then Blank Reg had like a truck and he just like broadcast whatever was handy, basically. Yeah. Like I remember one time he played in one episode, he played like this one video 23 times over and people were fine with it. And, I think he would be a good network programmer today, sadly. But
probably so.
Yeah. Love Blank Reg. Love it.
Good comparison, So as podcasters, just every week we are sticking it to the man.
Word.
That's what we're doing. He also appeared in Doctor Who, and we have seen him once before in Star Trek when he was the prison guard of Rura Penthe in Star Trek VI. And when I say we, I mean in our journey here of doing Mission Log. If you're going by strict chronological order, well, you still have a couple of years before you will see him in that role. We will see him again in upcoming shows, and he actually had an uncredited role in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek in 2009.
Yes, he was the Vulcan science officer.
Yes, he was. Very good, very good.
Now, and as we record this, I believe he's in his early 80s.
Yeah.
But seriously, if you go back through his career, the guy has never looked a day under 60.
No, exactly. Yeah, well, and like Max Headroom, as of this recording, we're talking about nearly 30 years ago.
Dude.
Yeah.
My sciatica. My joints. Look what you just did to me. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. A couple other guest appearances that I'm sure that you picked up. Tasha Yar and Rimek
Yeah.
If you look closely, got to get revisited by them, and the computer that encodes Dr. Graves, I found it very interesting that on some of those screens, if you freeze frame, you get a bunch of nonsense, but you also get like codes for hydrocarbons and proteins and acids. So, in fact, a lot of biological information in that computer that now contains the good doctor's information.
It is as the song says, when you're in love with a beautiful woman, you know it's hard. This is especially true when you are 97 years older than she is. And kind of a jerk. And never even tell her. Well, until you take over the body of another sentient being. Let us have John tell us more.
Prologue. Dr. Pulaski brings us into the story this week. The Enterprise is headed to answer a call from the assistant of the brilliant Dr. Ira Graves. Seriously, the man is brilliant. Everybody knows it, and everybody is worried what might be the problem. In his quarters, Data has gone full Riker. Yeah, in an attempt to fully experience humanity, Data calls in his friends Geordi and Deanna to see his newly grown beard. It's a little too much for Deanna to handle. She leaves while laughing. Arriving at Graves' world, yeah, the man is so good he just named a planet after himself. Another message arrives from the young woman who is his assistant. She's worried. She begs for immediate help, but that's all. Since it's just her and the doctor on the planet alone, what could be the problem? Act 1. Not to make things more difficult, but who are we kidding? Things get more difficult. A new distress call comes in from the Constantinople, a ship transporting colonists and now experiencing a hull breach. Riker suggests leaving a small team at Graves' World while the Enterprise takes off to help the Constantinople. One make it so later, and Data, Worf, Deanna, and a Vulcan, Dr. Salar, are beamed down while the Enterprise is at near warp. A bit of a tricky maneuver, but everyone is fine. A young woman introduces herself as Karine Briand. She was the one who sent the message, and she explains that Dr. Graves' condition is urgent. He's temperamental, agitated, and failing health. In walks Dr. Graves, and he's kind of a pain. He's all of those things for sure, and he's also kind of a jerk to his uninvited guests, except Deanna. He kind of likes her. He's also intrigued by Data since Graves knew Dr. Sung. While getting to know the android, Dr. Salar informs him of the bad news. He has Darnay's disease. It is terminal, and he is in the final stages. Act 2. In case you were worried about the people on board the Constantinople, don't be. Picard lets us know that they are all fine. Now the Enterprise is on its way back to Graves' World. Data and Dr. Graves are getting to know each other. Graves insists that Data calls him Grandpa. It's familiar, and after all, Graves taught Dr. Sung everything he knew. Graves takes the opportunity to size up Data. He's a thinking machine, but he's lacking something. Desire, a sense of mortality, a certain drive. Maybe it's heart. And Dr. Graves relays a bit of Wizard of Oz for those of us who don't get it, after sharing the tune of If I Only Had a Heart with Data. Meanwhile, Deanna is getting to know Karine. What Karine apparently didn't know, but Deanna sees plain as day, is that Dr. Graves has seriously got the hots for her. Yeah, that would never work out. He's an old man, she's young and just not interested. Dr. Graves shares the nature of his research with Data because, why not? The machine he's been working on is a device by which he can transfer his consciousness, his intellect, into electronic form. It's a way for him to cheat death, as it were. The Enterprise has achieved orbit of Graves' World and ready to beam up the away team. There will be one fewer than anticipated, though. Data makes the announcement. Dr. Graves is dead. Act 3. Data shares his experience with the captain. There was no time and really no point to alerting Dr. Salar about Graves finally dying. There was nothing more to be done. Data just wants to make sure that there's going to be a funeral for the late Dr. Graves. In 10 forward, Data finds Karine. She's distracted, in mourning, but he tries to console her. In fact, it's a bit too personal the way he talks about her and Dr. Graves. He lets her know that she was everything to Dr. Graves. Later in the transporter room, the remains of Dr. Graves are in a torpedo tube as a memorial service takes place. After a few words from the captain, Data gets up and, well, if the conversation with Karine was weird, this is just bizarre. He goes on and on about Graves as a paragon of intellect and humanity until Picard shuts him up. Picard asks Data about his strange behavior, and maybe it was just a fluke of his programming combined with the influence of Dr. Graves. Well, that's what we could chalk it up to. If Data then didn't leave the bridge while whistling If I Only Had a Heart. Act 4. The whole thing still isn't sitting right with Picard, and he asks Deanna for her take on it. She's concerned too, but maybe it is just a fluke. The grandfather analogy may have just fired something in Data's programming. On the bridge, that fluke is now acting like a total jerk to Wesley. Data puts the young ensign in his place by relaying his own intellectual superiority, and as much as we may like to see Wesley taken down a peg, this just isn't right. Karine is brought onto the bridge by Picard, and now Data turns his attention to him. Muttering under his breath, Data is showing quite a bit of jealousy. Then it's not so much under his breath when Data announces directly to Picard that he just knows he's making the move on Karine. Data, the captain will see you now, privately. Picard has lost patience with whatever is going on. He wants Data to be checked out to make sure he is functioning normally, and Data obliges by running the test on himself. See? Totally normal. Nothing to worry about here. Picard is not buying it because who would? In engineering, after a more thorough test, Geordi reports to the captain that there's nothing wrong with Data. Deanna sees this for what it is. It's not his physical health that is the problem. There's something going on mentally that needs to be addressed. She takes him to a computer where he is presented with images flashing in rapid succession. It's kind of a recap of season 1, but Deanna is there to judge his emotional reaction to the images. She reports back to the captain. Deanna can tell that there are 2 personalities, very distinct, taking up room in Data's body. The dominant personality suits Dr. Graves to a T, kind of a jerk, jealous, paranoid, brilliant, and this personality is taking over, squeezing out the Data we know. Act 5. Arriving at Starbase 6, the plan is to drop off Karine so she can go back to Earth. Data, meanwhile, is in 10 forward with her and finally lets her in on what we've known all along. Data isn't really Data at this point, but rather Ira Graves' intellect and personality in android form. Just look at him. Nearly immortal, fully functional, and guess what? He can make an android for her too, so that Karine doesn't have to grow old either. She's a bit freaked out by this and rejects his proposal. Leaving 10 forward, Graves in Data's body heads to engineering. Picard finds him there. Graves makes the case that as a man, his rights outstrip those of a machine. Picard says that Data is different, but a life form nonetheless. Graves has lost control. He physically hurt Karine while holding her hand. In engineering, he's hurt Geordi and another crewman. This experiment has failed in Picard's eyes, and Graves must leave Data's body. Graves isn't taking it too well. He lashes out at Picard, knocking him unconscious like the others on the same deck. Seeing that he can't control himself, Graves asks, how many more accidents? Data's body is in a computer lab, seemingly asleep. When woken, he's back to being his old self. Karine notices that in the computer nearby, the program running is Graves. It's his intellect, now in a more benign computer form. Available in both Mac OS and iOS versions for mobile computing. Karine leaves, and Dr. Graves' intellect has been retained by the Enterprise computer. Not to worry, though. Anything that might have had a personality was lost in translation. The end.
All's well that ends.
Just ends, yeah.
Nicely done. So,
thank you.
So I guess the key takeaway for me, and forgive me, I'm going to jump straight to the end for this one part anyway.
Go right ahead.
The key takeaway for me is I have to be sure and get myself into a robot body before I go nuts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if I do it once I go nuts, then I'm just a nutty robot.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, maybe we are jumping too close to the end, but...
Are we really? Because I wasn't planning to. I was just kidding. We can talk about it later if you want to.
No, but I think this is important to know. I think the important thing is that if you move your intellect, whether it's the sane Ken or the insane Ken, and hey, who are we to judge which is which? As long as you're not displacing another personality by doing it.
Oh, that's a whole different...
Then you're okay.
That we are going to talk about later.
Okay, good.
I found that fascinating. But
good.
Yeah, let's come back to it.
Did you notice that effect at the top of the show? So first of all, I like that Dr. Pulaski opened the show. It was just good to hear a different voice other than Picard.
Okay. I don't understand why.
I like the fact that we had a different voice, but what I really liked is the effect. She's walking down the corridor, reverse shot, and you see people in the corridor. It's a green screen shot. It's a process shot. But then when they reopen the turbolift door, she's on the bridge.
Yes.
So they actually did a series of cuts there with a green screen to give the effect of having this uninterrupted journey from a corridor to the turbolift onto the bridge. Really, really well done. It's a nice effect.
I like that quite a bit, yes. The part that confused me, and this kind of goes back to, and now either I feel bad for noticing this or I feel bad for giving you so much grief about worrying about it a few weeks ago. So we have the whole beginning with Worf and Riker and the holodeck. And well, this is going to say something important about, Worf. And no.
Right.
And so this week we've got Dr. Pulaski opening up and she's like, oh, we're going to Graves Planet. It's going to be, a Graves world. Excuse me. For all your Graves needs.
Yeah.
We're going to Graves world, and he's like smart and important, and we got to get there, and we're going to try to save him. And oh wait, I'm sorry, I got to go. But I'll tell you what, everybody else, you stay here. And Pulaski once again is practically not in this episode.
Yeah.
It was kind of weird to start. I mean, I figured this was going to be a Pulaski episode when we started watching it, because we're leading with her, so
right.
Nope.
Which, given her relationship with Data up until now, would have been very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a little unfortunate that we did not get that storyline.
Her actually in his quarters or in the computer room or whatever it was at the very end was actually a little confusing to me.
Yeah.
Right? Because Picard and Corrine and Geordi and Pulaski, for some reason, go to check on Data. And I could just see, like them going and her being like, yeah, no, I've got reading to do or something else, that I care about because you guys are going to go check on the toaster.
Yeah.
And so the fact that she was there and seemingly happy that, because we haven't seen much, well, with the exception of the Sherlock Holmes adventure. We haven't seen much interaction. We've seen no interaction, I think, between them since then.
Yeah, no, it's very true. We haven't. Yeah, and this would have really been a position to give her an ethical dilemma, kind of a problem. Yeah,
could have been.
Yeah,
could have been a lot of things, though.
Yeah, we didn't get that story. But hey, what we did get, we got Data with a beard. He looks good with a beard. Yeah, I thought. But I thought it was also just kind of a clever thing from the point of view of the production, because obviously Jonathan Frakes coming back with the beard, the Riker beard, was such a big deal. Yeah. So why not just sort of acknowledge that and throw one on Data too?
Are they making fun of Frakes at that point?
Well, see, here's the thing. I didn't necessarily get it as making fun. I just took it as acknowledging that it was a big deal that he got a beard.
All right.
That some fans probably loved it. Some fans probably hated it. And they probably got way more mail than was necessitated by the addition of a beard.
So was he like in there with crepe hair and liquid latex and doing that? Or does he have another face that he can put on? Or does Data actually have the ability to like grow and shrink his hair and facial hair as he sees fit?
That would be pretty cool, right?
Well, I'm trying to figure out what it was.
Yeah.
Because it was a nice beard. It was it was reminiscent of Reva's beard, actually. A little bit more, a little bit more close than that.
Yeah.
Than Reva's beard. But of course, Reva's beard, I imagine, was actually real to the actor. Whereas Spiner did not crank out that beard from week 1 to week 2, or from last week to this week.
No. But replicators
it's all gone by the
anything.
It's all gone by the time he gets to Graves World too.
Oh yeah. So it's got to be either something in his makeup or it's got to be something you can just replicate. You can be like, I want a turkey sandwich, or I want the full Riker.
Every time you say the full Riker, by the way, it sounds dirty.
That's why I keep saying it.
Nicely done. It makes me want to go make some green memories.
Yeah. Oh, hey, that's what we call the callback.
That is what we call that.
Well done. We have a Vulcan. You must have been as excited about that as I was.
We have a named Vulcan.
Yeah.
We have a named Vulcan who speaks. Am I right in thinking the last one of those that we had was the one that ended up being stuff on the transporter path in the motion picture?
I think you're right.
I think that was actually the last time we had a named Vulcan that was not Spock, because we saw
Commander
Spock.
Sonak. Yeah.
Well, yeah, Sonak. Thank you. Because no, I take it back. We did have one more since then. It was we
had Savick.
Savick, thank you. It was Kirstie Alley is what I was going to say. We had Savick, and then we had Valeris. Now that I think about it too. So never mind.
Yeah,
it's the first one in quite a while, though.
Yeah. Well, Valeris may have been Romulan. So, in a different script.
What?
Well,
Well, then we're talking actually about Vulcans and half Vulcans, aren't we? Savick was the full Vulcan, wasn't she?
Yeah, but it had been considered that there was a whole Romulan background to her. Yeah. We'll go, but we'll re-record that show.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
The full Vulcan, by the way, does not sound as dirty as the full Riker. I don't know what that is.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So I got a question, and I don't think it merits discussion, and that's why I'm doing it here instead of in the actual discussion part. Was there any point of the near warp transport? Was it just needless drama? Was it fake sciencey stuff? I mean, there were so many things here again, and maybe it's part of like trying to fill out a show, like trying to make it sound like, wow, we live in a real world now, as opposed to just we're doing a 48-minute teleplay, right? Because there's a whole thing like where Riker's like, oh, by the way, you're going to get a little weird.
Yeah.
and Troy's like, what? And then they just go ahead and do it to her anyway, which, by the way, totally uncool. Yeah, and then she dematerializes or rematerializes, and she's like, wow, for a minute there, I thought I was in that wall. And and Worf says, well, for a minute you were. Well, not a minute, but, for a moment. Yeah. For a moment you were. And it's sort of like, so are we going to talk about this? No.
I just, my note on that was, what? How can you say that and not come back to it?
Right.
How can you do that?
And also, how can you be such a jerk as to say, oh, by the way, this is going to freak you out? Well, wait, what's going to freak?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We're just going to go ahead and do it anyway, because it's your job and you don't get to have any say in it at all.
Right.
Because I kept thinking, we've established very well that the Enterprise can go and the Enterprise can stop. So it really, given a binary proposition like that, the Enterprise can stop.
Yes.
You can beam them down.
Right.
And then the Enterprise can go.
Because here's the question. Were they traveling at maximum warp already?
No.
Because if they weren't traveling at maximum warp, then you can go ahead and let's say, okay, well, we're at warp 5 right now. Let's go ahead and pull up to Graves' world. And then we'll go at warp, I don't know, 6? 8, 9, maybe we can go. There are all kinds of warps we can go, so that we don't have to risk everybody's life sending them down there. Right. Well, any more than you normally do, anyway.
Yeah, right. So let's talk about the disease a little bit that Dr. Ira Graves has. So that's why I mentioned that in the trivia. The schizoid personality disorder, is a thing, and that is a thing that could potentially make him act like an antisocial jerk. So it's not specifically the disease that he is suffering from that is about to end his life, Darney's disease, that is making him act like that. Because originally that's what I thought. I just kind of wrote it out, oh, okay, this is a disease that just makes him a terrible, terrible person. No, I think we can easily establish that he pretty much always is a terrible, terrible person, or at least difficult to deal with. And now the disease is just sort of compounding that.
You think that's what it is? Because, I mean, we do get the sense from Karine that it's gotten worse. Like, she didn't call them because of his coughing, right? He's coughing and he's having a tremendous amount of pain every time he coughs, and he's, tired. But she calls them because he's being, kind of a jerk. That's a nice word, right?
Yeah.
It's the nicest one I can think of for him. Yeah. So she gets in touch with them because he's being this kind of reprehensible individual. And yet we do get the sense that he is just kind of this reprehensible individual. Again, unless, the Darney's.
Doreen?
What? No, the Darney's syndrome, or Darnay's, or whatever it is. Dijonais. The thing, whatever. I mean, unless that is actually making him sort of a jerk, which goes back to what I was saying about be sure you transfer yourself into your robot body before you become, insane.
Right. Yeah. But the thing that was well thought out for him is to have Data deliver the eulogy. So I thought that was pretty great. You know, the sort of the desire to attend your own funeral. He gets to play that out. So that's kind of fun. And I thought that, you know, for a guy who, it's interesting that he has this personality disorder and he also has this disease that is making him impossible to be around. But he also gets his own planet where he can live like a jerk, right?
Right.
So it makes me think that, you know, ego is a thing that must be pretty well in check in the 24th century. Like if you're an obnoxious jerk and you've got an ego out of control, you're probably not going to live among people who don't have that and actually need you to get along with them. So like, let's say you're a member of a starship crew and you actually have to work together and live together and be respectful of each other. That's not a good job for a guy like this. But what is a good job is that he becomes a research scientist on his own planet. And he can just be away from everybody. You know?
I have no idea how to respond to that. I'm confused. Okay, there's stuff about him that I don't really get, right? Mm-hmm. First of all, I love how mean he is to Data when he first sees him. What is it? Yeah. Absolutely no aesthetic value at all. You look like the work of Dr. Sung.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. But so why is it that this guy is... Okay, so Sung had said that he's going to build a robot, right? Mm-hmm. An android, mm-hmm. I'm sorry. He's going to build an android. And then I think he failed at his first attempt at making an android, right?
Yeah.
I don't mean lore. I mean just he was going to do this. And so he ends up leaving the Federation kind of in shame. And he goes and changes his name and goes to the other planet and then starts mm-hmm. secretly building androids again, right? And that's where mm-hmm. we get lore mm-hmm. and Data and maybe some others we don't know. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, no, you're right.
All right.
Yeah.
So he tried to build a robot or an android and failed. Mm-hmm. But Graves doesn't seem to have ever done what he said he was going to do. He's on the verge of it the whole time. And it's right. and so for that he gets a planet and he gets an assistant and he gets all kinds of respect. He gets mad props from the galaxy. Everybody's like, oh, man, this guy's so intelligent. How intelligent? Well, so intelligent, he hasn't even tried to do what he said he's going to do yet.
Well,
because everybody knows that way lies shame.
Well, we know that that's something he was working on, but there may have been other things that he came up with that were totally brilliant.
Well, because he apparently taught Sung everything he knew.
Yeah.
And we know how well that went for Dr. I'm a tiny bit confused by the motivations around Graves in this episode, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey Starfleet, my scientific endeavor is all about getting my manufactured intelligence into a human body. So where's my bleeping planet?
Oh, Ken. I from the minute I started watching this episode and taking notes, and I said it at the beginning of this episode too, I thought that I could step out of this episode just to have a recording of me going, and now here's Ken, and let you go. Because as soon as we introduce the idea that this is an intellect being transferred into a machine,
yeah.
I just thought, ladies and gentlemen, the Ken Ray Show. Here we go. And you were going to go to it with this episode.
I could certainly see where you would think that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like there were actually episodes of the original series that treated it better than this. And I'm not saying whether it's a good episode or a bad episode or anything like that yet, but mm-hmm. I kind of feel like there was a bit of a hodgepodge going on in some of this stuff. But there are real points, I think, to discuss here.
Yeah.
Sadly, none of them actually involve the whole transferring yourself to a machine thing.
Well, it was funny. Yeah. I mean, as soon as I watched this, I thought, well, what are little girls made of? And there are other places where we get to explore this idea. But does this episode really do that?
Not so much, I don't think. Although, I mean, there were some interesting sort of personality things. So they have the whole thing with Data, right?
Mm-hmm.
I found Troy's delineation about the two personalities in Data, the whole our Data thing, mm-hmm. kind of interesting. The viewer knows that Dr. Graves, is it Dr. Graves or Dr. Grave? It's Graves.
Dr. Graves, yeah.
Okay, so Graves' world, party time, excellent. Graves' world is not possessive. It's actually one word. Whatever. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right, so we know that Dr. Graves has taken over Data. We as viewers do. Picard seems at the end of Act... I can't remember if it's the end of Act 3 or end of Act 4. He seems to be hitting on the idea that this is what's happened. I think he says something like, of course. And Troy says, what? You know, because Troy's slow in this episode.
Right.
And Picard says, nothing, go ahead. And so then we come back to the next act, and Picard's like, I'm worried about what's happening with Data. So he's not even suspecting. He's not even stating a suspicion at this point, right? So nobody knows that Dr. Graves has taken over Data, right?
Yeah.
But because what's happening is different, it's wrong. Now, we've hit on this idea that maybe what happened with Data is he felt a familial bond with Dr. Graves, who, as far as everybody knows, has died. And then, you know, suffering that loss, which, I mean, he suffered loss before, but he knew Tasha, and he knew Tasha as well. But there was no familial thing, really. There was camaraderie, but there was no lineage, let's say. So, I mean, they're hitting on the possibility that maybe something in his programming has changed, right? But that change is wrong.
Yeah.
Which I found kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with him, but we do know that we like him the way that he was. And so even before we know that somebody has taken over his body, this has to stop. Now, it turns out it's good that they decide that because somebody has taken over his body. And so it does have to stop. But I mean, really, all they knew was that he was going through a personality change.
Yeah. And they so really in a different timeline, in a parallel universe, Data's natural evolution based on his programming, makeup, and his response to stimulus is that he could just turn into a jerk.
Quite possibly.
He could just turn into an egotistical jerk.
Right. But then they don't even figure out how to deal with that. There's like, okay, well, we need to turn him back the way he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we don't like this Data. We like the
other
Data.
And there's kind of the presumption, and you're a machine, and we can do that. We can fix you to make you the way you used to be. Well, or we can figure out what's wrong to make you the way you used to be.
That to me was one of the most amazing things that Troy said in this episode. She says, you know, that she hopes that the only thing wrong with the android is that he's just suffering a loss that has stirred emotions so deep that nobody knew that he had them.
Right.
Like they're like, oh, I don't know, maybe it's the loss of Graves that's changing him fundamentally. And she says, oh, I hope that's all.
Yeah, right.
Really?
Right, because we could find that part and cut it out of him.
Yeah, I guess so. Or just say the magic incantation that reboots him back to. Does he run like versions like they do on a Mac?
He might. He might.
Like time machine. He has his own special time machine that you can put him back in.
Yeah, you could just go back and restore him from the day before, which they kind of do by the end of the episode. He forgets everything that happened.
Well, they don't do that. That happens.
No.
Yeah.
No, it does happen though. Yeah.
Dr. Ira does that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I started to try to look at this episode to see if it was trying to say something about the difference between humanity and machine life, because I feel like the original series tried to do that many times. But I'm like you, I watched this episode thinking, okay, here's the moment where they're going to say something. But really what it just came down to was Picard battling the will of Graves because Graves took over. He usurped this other being. And I thought, from early on, he said, when Graves was sort of interrogating Data about desire, and I thought, okay, well, are we saying something about that? Could we say that desire then is the thing that separates human life from machine life? And I thought it was interesting that Graves described Data's existence as a kind of purgatory. You're alive but dead, and you may have wants, but you don't really have a burning desire for anything. But then Geordi comes back around later and he says Data wants to be human so bad he can taste it.
Yeah.
Which maybe is Geordi inferring a bit much about Data.
Well,
but
Graves is doing that as well, though. He's projecting all over the place.
Yeah.
Oh, it must be hell for you. It must be terrible for you to know that you'll never know, and not really feel, and all of those things. And things don't jive with what we know about Data.
Yeah.
to this point, right? So Graves asked Data, do you know what desire is? And Data starts to give him a textbook answer. And then Graves says, no. Do you know what desire is? And Data says, no, I don't. Well, except that we've known of Data's desire to be human since Encounter at Farpoint. He practices whistling because it's a human thing, and he wants to do it. He's gotten really good at it by this episode. Well, right. I'm sorry, actually, it's Graves that can do that. Yeah, so I guess maybe Data still needs to learn, right?
Yeah.
And Geordi and Troy act in the prologue as if Data's interest in being more human is a new thing, right? It's also weird. I mean, there's so much stuff that just kind of got jammed in here, and I apologize. My notes are a little scattered. There's also this weird thing of Troy does not pick up on Data in terms of feelings.
Right.
The way she did with Moriarty.
Right.
Until Graves is in Data. But even then, she doesn't pick up on it immediately. She picks up on it when it becomes like burning jealousy, seething rage and jealousy, right? Yeah. But that doesn't even necessarily have to do with her being Betazoid. That just has to do with her sort of being, awake on the bed.
Right. Because kind of anybody could see that coming. Yes.
You would think so, yes. You would think so, and yet nobody seems to until she does. Right. I don't know. There's stuff that it seems like a lot of projection. Why does Graves see tragedy in Data's walking without feeling? And would he feel the same way? Is it part of his whatever? Is it part of the Darnase? Is that what it's called?
Darnase.
Darnase. Okay. Darnase. So does he when he's in a room by himself? Does he look at a table and go, "Oh, it's so tragic"? You just sit there without feeling, knowing, because I mean, he's assuming an awful lot about Data, and I don't know.
Well, he's also assuming an awful lot about Karine as well. I mean, and this kind of goes back to sort of the ego-driven life that he has. And again, this, if we describe it as a schizoid personality disorder, he goes around assuming that he knows what is best, and he doesn't actually connect with the emotional lives of other people. He is purely driven by what he wants and what he needs. She says at the end, Karine, I won't let you put me in a machine, which indicates to me that, the problem here is Graves' single-minded drive. I mean, his ego has assumed that he knows what's best for her. He also assumes he knows what's best for Data, which is for Data to not be there anymore,
Well, I don't think he thinks it's best for Data to not be there anymore. I just think he thinks it's best for him for Data to not be there anymore. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's just, and he actually got fairly, it's weird for a guy who has been working on molecular cybernetics, right? I mean, for him to say, I know who should live and what must die.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So like, dude, you're that what now? I mean, what if somebody else comes along and they're like, oh, well, look at this. We found the original, the first Vulcan, not the first Vulcan. What's his name?
Oh, Sarek.
Yes.
You're thinking about, the father of Vulcan logic. That's what you're looking for, right?
Sarek was.
Surak. I'm sorry.
Surak. Yeah. See, it's the vowels that'll get you. Yeah. So if they suddenly find Surak and say, oh wow, well, and they caught in a transporter buffer or under a rock, and we didn't know, but he's going to die in like a minute. Hey, Data Graves, I know, but he's the premier Vulcan. He's like the Vulcanist Vulcan there is. So you're going to have to shuffle along, pal. How cavalier he was about machine intelligence when what he's been working on is theoretically that. Although, has he really just been working the whole time on how to get himself into a machine? I mean, has that really been his life's work?
What it seemed like to me, because again, he's a guy who doesn't really know or care about other people. So
is this why they gave him a planet? They're like, no, you go stay by yourself, and as soon as you are able to get yourself into a machine, call us.
You let us know.
Because we are so going to turn that machine off the second we can. I mean, was that the plan? I don't know. It's kind of bizarre.
I do have how many times in school with a young Dr. Graves, its classmates say, hey, does this guy have an off switch? Because I'd love to find it. Right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So is it going to be solar powered? No. Don't be solar powered. No, it's a plug into the wall, because solar's no good. Make sure it plugs into the wall and tape it down, because we would certainly hate to trip on it and power you down. I did have one other question about Data.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand desire, but he is conscious of his own mortality. But he's more than conscious of his own mortality. It's not that he knows. It's not that he knows that he can die. He gets that, right? But he actually, when he's telling, just random whoever that he's got an off switch, and I know it's his grandpa, but still, he actually says, in a way that's like dying, it is a prospect that I do not enjoy contemplating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, if I really tried to parse this and try to separate what Data is saying, or maybe what Graves is meant to infer from it, the desire thing I thought was very specific, and that what Graves is talking about is this burning, driving, single-minded desire that Data may still not be able to understand. Data has wants. Data has intellectual desires. Again, I go back to this position that I have that Data knows intellectually that he cannot actually be human, but what he can do is immerse himself and try to assimilate as much of human experience as he can to be almost indistinguishable from human. But he knows that he is not. He is a constructed machine. And at best, he can absorb, personality and intellect and original thought that humans have. So there is all of that. I think the prospect of an on-off switch and him contemplating or not enjoying contemplating the idea that he can be switched off, I mean, that may just simply be a kind of survival instinct. And you don't even need to call it an instinct, but a survival subroutine that he's got. That Dr. Soong can say, hey, it is better for you to be on than off, So whatever you can do to protect it, this goes back to the first law of robotics, It's like whatever you can do to protect yourself, or no, I'm sorry, that's the third law of robotics, yeah.
Geek.
Sorry, I gotta get them in order. I gotta get 1, 2, and 3 in order, because they are very specifically designed not to contradict. But yeah, Data is given this sort of sense that he has to protect himself and survive, even if survival just means being switched on.
All right. Some of that seems some of that seems to read as desire to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. It felt like it felt sort of hodgepodgey, like I say.
But I mean, I think that's by the same token, that's sort of the unfortunate thing about this episode, but that is the interesting thing about Data is that there's a lot of gray area with Data. And that's why Data is so much fun to talk about, because you can't just dismiss him as Graves was trying to do in this episode, as just a machine that can be turned on and off at the will of a human. Picard comes in, and what I loved happening here is the beginning of this idea of Picard defending Data. We may very well get to revisit that in an upcoming episode.
Maybe we will.
Yeah. I thought it was an interesting conundrum. How can you trust a machine that says it's doing fine? I thought that was a great moment. It's like waking up HAL 9000 and HAL saying, I'm perfectly functional and all my circuits are fine. It's great. Yeah. No, they are, except for the point where you try to kill the astronauts on board.
Oh, you don't even do that. Don't even do that. That was his programming. He was programmed to do that. He was functioning exactly as he was programmed to function.
I'm just saying there's a lot about Data that they may not know.
I was talking about HAL. I'm sorry.
No, I know. Yeah.
Right.
I don't think that Data will try to kill the people on board the Enterprise.
Fingers crossed.
Not on purpose.
Yeah.
I felt like this was an episode kind of like The Neutral Zone, where Next Gen was trying to take this like high road approach to death. Picard says that he understands Dr. Graves' fear of death, but he says, every man has his time, every man, but you have cheated. You have extended your life at the expense of another. And I did kind of think a little bit about The Neutral Zone waking up those 3 frozen 20th century relics and then kind of lecturing them, or at least not to their face, at least amongst the enlightened 24th century Enterprise crew, like, oh, they just didn't realize that what they needed to do was die. because really that's the natural order of things. You know, we know so much better than that.
That's I still don't think that was the point, though.
I don't think it was the point of the episode, but it sure as hell came across like that. I mean, they have lines in that episode that basically say that.
Yeah, but they also get, I mean, remember it was it Offenhouse? Was that the guy's name? Wow.
Yeah.
What the heck? Seriously?
Who are you?
I know. I can't remember the first Vulcan, but I remember the dumb business guy. Yeah, so Offenhouse, I mean, did actually end up, moving the plot along. Mm-hmm. I mean, we got things from that episode, but we don't have to go back and talk about that episode. Yes, they were sort of dismissive of those characters, but each one of those characters kind of stepped in and saved the day a bit. Well, not LQ Sonny. I can't remember his last name. Clemens.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Yeah. Picard, at some point, though, he does seem to be a little bit in awe of what Graves had accomplished and stunned and maybe a little saddened that he has to tear down the bridge between man and machine. And that's where we get that quote from Shakespeare's sonnet number 18. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. What do you make of using that particular sonnet? Because that is the sonnet that begins, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's a love poem.
He does say at one point, Picard does say to Graves that this is not what he meant to do, that Data coming by was a happy accident, but it gave him more than he ever thought. It's possible that what he's saying is it was Graves' love for Karine, although you can debate whether it was love or, infatuation or something like that. That it was Graves' love for Karine that made him do something that otherwise he wouldn't have done. Except I don't get an indication that he would not have done this otherwise.
Well, that's the thing, and maybe that's a sort of a shortcoming of the story the way it is, because if you do go by the context of the Shakespearean sonnet, the idea of love making something immortal, great, or love making one see their lover as immortal, great, but I agree with you. I didn't really get the Karine love story other than just a creepy old man.
Well, no, she was lovely. I mean,
she was.
You don't have to be a creepy old man to find her attractive. I don't.
Oh no. And hey, I'm not saying that he didn't find her attractive. I'm not saying that I didn't find her attractive, because I think she was lovely. But you didn't build the idea of this truly being a love story. You just built it as like a weird infatuation.
Yeah.
No,
Yes. Yeah. Well, I have a feeling that as much as we're talking about it, our summation of Dr. Graves is going to be much shorter.
It may very well be. So is it then just shades of What Are Little Girls Made Of, but not as good as What Are Little Girls Made Of? Because I kept thinking, here's this amazing technology where you can take a consciousness of a human being and put it into a computer, and wow, that is incredible. If only Kirk hadn't destroyed the machine that could already do that 100 years ago, where you stand on the disco dance platform, you spin around, and boom, there's your consciousness indistinguishable in a robot body. So I wondered a little bit if we hadn't already been down this road before and made more interesting story of it with What Are Little Girls Made Of?
Well, I mean, I feel like to answer that question is going to jump ahead a tiny bit. It feels like what we've got here is just like the Frankenstein story in a way. I mean, he's a mad scientist. I mean, is really what it comes down to. In fact, it's not even as good as a Frankenstein story. He's just a mad scientist. And it's not his science that's mad. He is a scientist who is crazy.
Yeah, right.
Right. So right. I mean, that's the cool thing about, Dr. Roger Corby, who I love, Dr. Roger Corby, has this idea that's sort of driving him, and he doesn't see like the folly in his idea. Now, whether there actually is folly or not, that's a whole other thing. Could it be done a different way? Blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
There's folly in what Dr. Roger Corby is doing, and he doesn't see it because he's so driven by science. Graves is a scientist who's also just, made of folly. I mean, he's like, he's like, oh, me. I mean, that's pretty much his thing. Like Roger Corby was, oh, science, you know.
And
Graves is like, Graves. So, I don't know. Oh, look, it's me in a machine. Hey, look, it's me in another machine. It's, you know, of course you will love me. I actually want to go back to really quickly this one thing you said about Corrine. She actually struck me as a tiny bit short-sighted here.
Yeah.
Forgive me.
Okay.
Says the guy who has no problem thinking about putting himself in a robot body one day. You know, she's like, I'm not going to let you put me in a robot body. You know, if I'm Graves, I'm like, well, honey, hold on a second. I mean, we're talking like 50, 60 years from now. You're fine right now. Okay. It's just when you're about to die, I'm thinking then, because it's going to take me a few years to build you a robot body anyway. It's not like I got one waiting over there. I don't have one waiting over there, Corrine. Don't worry. It'll take some time. I mean, her whole, you know, no, I want to live my life. You're not going to put me in a machine. I mean, she was sort of doing an A-B proposition there, and I don't think it was that.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. She could have given it a little bit more thought.
Well, it might be a little horrifying, though. If you've not spent years, you know, sort of playing with the idea of putting yourself in a robot body, as some people have, then it might be kind of a horrific thing. You know?
Well, and see, here's the thing. Again, you go back to the idea that this is not somebody that she was deeply in love with presenting this idea to her. This is the creepy old man that she'd been stuck on a planet with alone since she was a little girl. Yeah. You know, it's not like Sargon.
Since she was a little girl, what?
Yeah. Remember, they said at the beginning of the show that her father had died. Her father worked for Graves, and he had died when she was much younger. Yeah.
Wow. Is there no DHS in the 24th century? Not DHS. That's Department of Homeland Security. What's
DCFS, Department of Childhood and Family Services.
Well, something like that. Sure.
Yeah.
Are there no social workers in the 24th century? I guess that's what I'm saying.
We need that. We need that badly.
What happened? Her father died. How old is she? 8? Oh, 8? Please.
It's hey, she's on Graves World. What could go wrong?
It's just her and the significantly older man.
That man's brilliant. Didn't you know that?
Also, kind of a jerk. We really don't want to go there unless we have to.
Yeah. We'll just chalk this up as a non-emergency for right now. One last thing I want to hit on. All right. She says Ira put himself in the computer.
Yeah.
All right. In the Enterprise computer, in that little lab where Data was getting the test done. And then I thought, okay, Ira's consciousness.
Nope.
Then No. Well, it says you give the impression that his personality is gone.
Oh, yes.
And his knowledge becomes part of the Enterprise computer. This all happens in the last 60 seconds of the show.
Yep.
And this seems like an ending where I went, well, wait a minute, where's the sequel? Where's the rest of the story here? Because just a couple of weeks ago, we've already seen that the Enterprise computer can outperform Data in many ways, and it can make these essentially living beings with thoughts and, yes, desires and motivations. And I kept thinking, what's to stop the Enterprise computer now from making a Dr. Graves avatar on the holodeck that has some form of consciousness or has some desire to continue his work? So it's very convenient that they say, oh, we got the intellect, but we just get to dispense with all that nasty personality part of him. We just cut out the part we don't like. And then I thought, this is like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You know, this is like, well, we'll keep him around, but we just want him in a way that he can't ever talk to us again.
Once again, a human, living life as a robot or computer, fails to work on Star Trek. Color me surprised.
All right, Ken, we've had a lot of fun at the expense of Dr. Ira Graves, and I think that he would be very upset about that and find us both juvenile and anti-intellectual. But in this case...
I don't know. We spent like 45 minutes talking about him.
Talking about what a jerk he was.
It doesn't matter. I don't think he would hear that. I think what he would hear is Graves.
Graves, that's all.
Graves. Graves World. I like that. Yes, good.
Yeah, I like the sound of that.
Plenty of me in this episode. I'm fine with it. Go ahead, boys.
But we get the last word here. So I will pose it to you. does the episode, The Schizoid Man, hold up?
No. It's got some... I love the actor, whose name I don't know. I never know his name. I'm always happy to see him. But
William Morgan Shepherd.
William Morgan Shepherd, thank you. Yep. I love the actor. I always love seeing him do stuff. That's neat. He's sort of a fun guy. Where this episode works for me is just in thinking about all of the things that they might have done, right? Yeah. But, I mean, it would need... I mean, there are 2 or 3 wonderful novels in here, it seems to me. Not necessarily Star Trek novels, but just novels in general. If they didn't already have a plan for how Data was going to be, if we weren't going to make Data the Tin Man for, however many seasons Star Trek is going to be on, if we didn't set it up that he's always going to want to be human, wow. I mean, it actually would have been mind-blowing to, like a few weeks into the second season, do a complete personality change for Data. And I don't mean, well, now he's Dr. Graves. I mean, now he is this sort of spliced together thing, right? Which honestly, he should have been from the whole, as you mentioned earlier, from the whole Encounter at Farpoint, well, not Encounter at Farpoint, but from the whole thing with the crystalline entity, where it turns out he's made of all the different personalities of all the different colonists.
Right.
I mean, it would have been really interesting to see to see how that blending played out, or how that worked. You have a chance of a sentient ship, which is something that happens in a lot of different science fiction, almost never happens in Star Trek. And of course, when it does, it's got to be stopped ASAP.
Right.
But you've got something close to me. You've got the idea of a sentient ship sort of like waiting off the page here. And sadly, it's going to stay off the page. I mean, what you get is sort of the usual thing. Life prolongation is bad. There's a bit of a Frankenstein thing going as well. It's got interesting ideas, and certainly we found a lot to talk about with it, but that's because these tend to be the kinds of topics that jazz us, especially when, the topics aren't handled particularly well on the screen. At least that's my feeling. What about you?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm pretty much right on the same page with you. I love the ideas in this episode, and I kind of liked having the cantankerous, crazy old doctor. I just felt like we were getting so close to really getting to go deep about Data and what makes him tick and whether or not he's alive and what kind of rights he has. And I know that I'm getting ahead of myself. I know that we will likely be able to talk about those topics again.
Right.
But I wish that there were more here. I wish that there was a little more of a groundwork laid here because, as you say, what we get is the Frankenstein story. We get the mad scientist who is mad because he is mad. He is just crazy because he is crazy, and he is single-minded and ego-driven, and he doesn't care who he steps on in his drive to do what he's doing. So there's something here about, an unchecked desire, an unchecked drive.
It reminded me of Cat's Paw. Honestly,
it
reminded me of Cat's Paw because I remember you saying, well, yeah, I know. It's okay. I remember you saying that Cat's Paw was supposed to be the Halloween episode. This struck me as a mad scientist story. And that was it. And somebody said, let's do a mad scientist story. Now, I don't know that that's actually what they did. Like, go write me a mad scientist story. But what they came back with was that. And in that respect, it simply boiled down to something as simple as Cat's Paw to me. Not the haunted house thing, but just sort of the, let's do Frankenstein, or let's do, the Fiendish Dr. Phibes, or whatever. Let's just crazy guy does something bad. It'll be fine in the end.
It would have been very interesting to see these two stories develop separately. So the original story, Core Dump, where they're in on the idea of helping this doctor to move his consciousness. And then the other story where you've got Data's leading personalities coming out when they're around this woman. Yes. So in a different production schedule, when those happened on their own separately and fully, we may have had a very different result. But I agree that what we get here is, I mean, here's the thing. You and I can say that it doesn't hold up. Now, I don't think it's a bad episode. I don't think it's just unwatchable or not entertaining. There's interesting stuff happening here, and certainly the performances are good, and it's got a lot going for it, but it just seems like kind of a missed opportunity. Yeah,
there are a couple of inconsistencies that I don't like. I mean, like the interest that Picard does take in Karine. I know there's nothing. I know there's nothing untoward about it. but he normally doesn't.
Yeah,
he has to in this episode because that has to upset Graves, and that has to set that whole ball rolling. But normally that would be the highest level that might go as Riker, I think.
Yeah, right.
Right. And so that inconsistency bothered me, and that may sound like a small thing, but if you're going to hinge the whole show on it, maybe make it something that actually might happen.
Yeah, right. What about the message?
Well, unfortunately, I think I said it a minute ago. I mean, it tends to be the life prolongation is bad deal again. I think. I don't know. I mean, there's the whole idea that, what was the line from Picard?
Which
no being is so important that he can usurp the rights of another.
There you go.
That's a fantastic message, no matter what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no matter what you're talking about, if you're not talking about a guy replacing a robot brain with his own brain,
which we talk about often.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. But I mean, the idea that somebody would say, look, no person is so important that somebody else's rights should be impinged or impugned or trampled over or whatever. It's a great sentiment. Almost never happens on the planet that we live on currently. Yeah. But, I mean, I like that. That's not a message of the whole show, I don't think, though, because this is really Picard in defense of his one guy.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if you had like a whole, well, I don't know. I like that. So there's another potential message in there. It's kind of one of those gem lines that I don't think the whole show actually hinges on. What about you?
Yeah, I do think that is the best line of the whole show. And if there is an inferred message here about don't mess with Mother Nature or beware of life prolongation or however you want to put it, I think that's unfortunate because Star Trek very often shows great technologies that prolong life in a very positive and beneficial way that we would all hope for today. So there's a little bit of a mixed message sometimes coming from the show. There was another line that actually Graves has when he's talking to Data. He says, without heart, man is meaningless, which is a good line, but it's coming from the crazy guy who has no heart. So, because a guy with heart then would not allow his own ego to trample over the rights of somebody else. But taken out of context, it's a perfectly good line.
Yeah, no, it's lovely. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe those two lines hold up quite well.
Yeah. No, it's not. As you say, it's not unwatchable. It was uneven. I mean, the show was a bit uneven. I kind of wish there had been something more that happened, because once we realize so early on that it is Graves, then it's sort of like, wow, how can nobody else pick up on this? It takes a little while. I mean, no, it's not terrible, but it's not great.
Well, a little bit of business before we wrap it up. Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Executive producer Rod Roddenberry. Please find more at roddenberry.com. And for even more exciting Star Trek podcasts, please check out Trek FM. That's trek.fm. And for the latest in Star Trek news and discussion, be sure to visit trekmovie.com.
And be sure to join us again next week for Unnatural Selection.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages by Key Theory, free to download at kitheory.com. On your downtime this weekend, be sure to stop by Holodeck 4, where the superintelligence of Dr. Moriarty and the disembodied spirit of Dr. Ira Graves present Neil Simon's The Odd Couple. And transmission.